moments in life that seem insignificant when they happen. A missed train, a forgotten conversation, a message left unanswered. Most of them disappear into the background of our memories, buried beneath the routine of everyday life. But sometimes without warning, one small moment becomes the dividing line between who you were and who you become afterward. For me, that moment arrived at exactly 2:17 inches in the morning. And even now, years later, I still wake up some nights and stare at the darkness, wondering whether what happened was real or whether grief has simply convinced me it was. My name is Ethan. When this happened, I was 22 years old and studying at a university nearly 300 kilometers away from my hometown. I lived alone in a small apartment above an old bakery on the edge of the city. The place wasn't much. The walls were thin, the heating barely worked during winter, and the pipes made strange noises whenever someone downstairs used hot water. Still, it was mine. At that age, independence felt more important than comfort. My mother never understood that. Not completely, anyway. She was the kind of woman who worried about everything. If it rained, she worried I had forgotten my umbrella. If it snowed, she worried I wasn't wearing enough layers. If I didn't answer my phone for an hour, she imagined every possible disaster. Growing up, I found it comforting. When I got older, I found it exhausting. Every evening around the same time, my phone would ring. Mom. Without fail. Sometimes she wanted to know what I had eaten. Sometimes she wanted to know whether I had enough money. Sometimes she called for no reason at all, just to hear my voice. At first I answered every call. Then university became busier. Classes, assignments, part-time work, friends, life. Slowly, her calls became interruptions. I hate admitting that now, but it's the truth. Sometimes I would let the phone ring until it stopped. Sometimes I would send a quick text. Busy. I'll call later. Most of the time, I never called later. Yet she never complained. Not once. The next day, she would simply call again as though nothing had happened. Looking back, I think she understood something that I didn't. Parents know there will come a day when they hear their child's voice for the last time. Children never think about hearing their parents' voice for the last time. To us, they seem permanent, like mountains, like the sea, always there, always waiting. The Thursday before everything changed felt completely ordinary. The sky had been gray all day. A cold autumn rain drifted through the city streets, turning the pavement slick and reflective beneath the yellow streetlights. I finished my shift at the cafe shortly before midnight. My feet ached. My back hurt. I was exhausted. All I wanted was sleep. When I reached my apartment, I tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter and collapsed onto the sofa. The room was silent, except for the ticking clock hanging above the television. I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls, all from Mom. I remember staring at the screen for several seconds. A strange feeling of guilt touched me. I considered calling her back. I really did. But then I looked at the time. Almost midnight. She's probably asleep already, I thought. I'll call tomorrow. Instead, I opened YouTube and watched random videos until my eyes grew heavy. Eventually, I carried myself to bed. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window. The city seemed distant, muted, like the entire world was slowly drifting into sleep. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when the ringing began. At first, it blended into my dream. Then it became louder, more insistent. My eyes opened. The room was dark. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The ringing continued. I reached blindly toward the bedside table. My phone screen illuminated the darkness. One name glowed against the black background. Mom. I squinted at the clock. 2:17 a.m. Immediately, I felt a knot form in my stomach. My mother never called this late. Never. Half asleep, I answered. Hello. My voice sounded thick and tired. No response. Only silence. I frowned. Mom. The line remained open. I checked the screen. The call was still connected. Then I heard something. A faint sound. So faint, I almost thought it was static. Breathing. Slow. Uneven. As though someone were struggling to calm themselves. I sat up. Suddenly awake. Mom. Nothing. The breathing continued. Then came another sound. A quiet sob. The kind someone makes when they're trying desperately not to cry. My heartbeat accelerated. The darkness around me suddenly felt oppressive. Cold. Mom, are you okay? No answer. Only another soft cry. My hand tightened around the phone. Every instinct told me something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The sound was distant. Not because of poor reception. It felt distant in another way, as though the person on the other end wasn't speaking from far away, but from somewhere unreachable. I know how ridiculous that sounds. I know what people will think, trust me. I've spent years trying to explain it rationally, but that's exactly how it felt. Like listening to someone trapped behind a wall, or underwater, or in another room entirely. Then, I heard what sounded like a whisper, so quiet that I couldn't make out a single word. I held the phone closer. "Mom," the whisper came again. Then silence. Complete silence. For several seconds, neither of us made a sound. I remember staring into the darkness of my bedroom, listening so carefully that I could hear my own pulse. And then the call ended. Just like that. The screen went black. I immediately sat upright. Sleep vanished completely. "Mom," I said aloud, though the line was already dead. I called back. Once. Twice. 3 times. Straight to voicemail. My anxiety grew with each attempt. I considered calling my father, but it was nearly 2:30 in the morning. Maybe she'd accidentally called me in her sleep. Maybe she'd left the television on. Maybe I was overreacting. I kept searching for explanations. Any explanation. Yet none of them felt right. I got out of bed and walked to the window. Rain still fell beyond the glass. Street lights shimmered across the wet pavement below. The city was empty. Silent. I stood there for a long time, holding my phone, waiting for it to ring again. It never did. Eventually I returned to bed, but I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that sound again. The quiet sobbing, the uneven breathing, the whisper. Most of all, I remembered the feeling. That terrible feeling that someone needed me, that someone was trying to reach me. Hours later, dawn finally arrived. Gray lights slowly filled the room. Cars began moving through the streets below. The city woke up. Life continued. Normal. Ordinary. Yet something inside me felt different, as though an invisible crack had appeared somewhere deep within my chest. A crack I couldn't explain. A crack I couldn't see. But one that would soon break everything apart. At that moment, I still believed there had to be a logical explanation. I still believed I would call my mother later that day and laugh about the strange phone call. I still believed everything was fine. I had no idea that the call at 2:17 a.m. would become the most important conversation I never truly had. And I certainly had no idea that it would be the last time I would ever hear my mother's voice. The following morning felt strangely normal. That's what I remember most. Not fear, not confusion. Normality. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of my apartment. Cars moved along the street below. Somewhere downstairs, the bakery owner was already opening for the day, and the smell of fresh bread drifted upward through the old building. The world continued exactly as it always had, yet I couldn't stop thinking about the phone call. The sound of that quiet crying still echoed inside my head. I had slept less than 2 hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. The breathing, the whisper, the silence. Around 9 o'clock, I finally picked up my phone. My hands felt oddly nervous. I pressed my mother's contact. The line rang twice. Then she answered. "Good morning, sweetheart." Her voice sounded completely normal, warm, gentle, alive. Relief rushed through me so suddenly that I nearly laughed. For a moment, I felt embarrassed for worrying so much. "Mom." "Yes, did you call me last night?" A brief silence followed. "What time?" "About 2:17, I heard her thinking. Then she replied, "No." I frowned. "What do you mean, no, I didn't call you?" I sat upright in bed. "Mom," I literally answered. Another pause. "I was asleep, Ethan." I forced a small laugh. "Maybe you called accidentally." "No." Her voice remained calm. I put my phone on the bedside table before going to sleep. The knot from the night before slowly returned. I opened my recent calls. There it was. 2:17 a.m. Incoming call. Mom. Duration 38 seconds. I stared at it. "Mom, the call is in my history. That's impossible." The certainty in her voice unsettled me. For the first time, she sounded genuinely confused. "I haven't touched my phone since yesterday evening." We spoke for a few more minutes. Eventually, we both agreed it must have been some kind of technical error, a pocket dial, a network glitch, something, anything. Before hanging up, she asked the same question she always asked. "Are you eating properly?" I smiled. "Trying to. You work too much." "I know. And you're sleeping too little." "I know. You should come visit soon." There was something almost childish in the way she said it, as though she already knew what my answer would be. "I will. When? Soon. You always say soon." I laughed again. "I mean it this time." "Good." For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she said softly, "I miss you." The words hit harder than they should have, because the truth was that I missed her too. I just never admitted it. "Love you, Mom. I love you more." The call ended. I remember staring at the screen afterward. A strange guilt lingered inside me. Not overwhelming, just enough to make me uncomfortable. Enough to remind me that months had passed since my last visit home. Enough to remind me how often I'd ignored her calls. I pushed the feeling aside. Life moved on. Assignments, work shifts, exams, days blended together. Yet, something about the incident refused to leave my mind. Every few nights, I found myself checking the call log. The entry remained there. 2:17 a.m., 38 seconds. As if silently waiting. A week passed. Then another. Autumn deepened. The rain became colder. Leaves gathered along the sidewalks and university pathways. The city prepared itself for winter, and slowly I stopped thinking about the phone call. At least during the day. At night was different. Sometimes I would wake unexpectedly. No nightmare. No noise. Just a sudden feeling of sadness. The kind that appears without explanation. The kind that feels borrowed from someone else. One Thursday afternoon, almost exactly 3 weeks after the call, I was sitting in a lecture hall taking notes. The professor was discussing something complicated. Economic theory, I think. I wasn't paying much attention. My phone vibrated once. Then again. Then again. I glanced down. Dad. My father never called during the day. Never. Another vibration. And another. Something cold moved through my chest. I stepped outside the lecture hall and answered immediately. "Dad." For several seconds I heard nothing. Then I heard him breathing. Heavy. Unsteady. And suddenly I knew. Before he even spoke, I knew. "Ethan." His voice broke. The sound that followed wasn't speech. It was crying. My father never cried. Not when his own father died. Not when he lost his business years earlier. Not once. Hearing him cry felt wrong, like hearing a mountain crack apart. "Dad," I whispered. My legs felt weak. "What's happened?" Another silence. Then 4 words. 4 simple words that divided my life into before and after. "It's your mother." The world disappeared. The hallway. The students. The sounds around me. Everything vanished. Only his voice remained. "She had a stroke." I couldn't breathe. "No. We found her this morning." "No. Ethan." "No." I kept repeating it, as though denial could somehow change reality, as though refusing to believe it might reverse what had already happened. My father continued speaking. Words flowed through the phone. Doctors, hospital, emergency services, times, details. None of it registered, because my mind had become trapped inside one impossible truth. My mother was gone. Gone. The word itself felt meaningless. People use it so casually. Gone. But when it happens to someone you love, the word becomes enormous. It consumes everything. I don't remember packing. I don't remember booking the train. I barely remember the journey home. Hours passed in fragments. Gray skies beyond the window. Rain on the glass. Strangers talking quietly nearby. The entire world seemed detached from reality, as though I were watching someone else's life unfold. When I finally arrived home, my father was standing outside the house. For a second, he looked 20 years older. His hair seemed grayer, his shoulders smaller. When he saw me, he walked forward and embraced me. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence contained everything. The next few days became a blur. Family members arrived. Neighbors brought food. Flowers appeared everywhere. People spoke in hushed voices. Everyone kept saying the same things. She was wonderful. She loved you so much. She was proud of you. Each sentence felt like a knife, because every compliment reminded me of something else, something I couldn't escape. The missed calls, the unanswered messages, the visits I postponed, the conversations I rushed, the moments I assumed there would always be time for later. Later. It is a dangerous word. Sometimes later never arrives. The night before the funeral, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom. Nothing had changed. The shelves, the photographs, the old posters on the walls, everything remained exactly where it had always been, except her. I opened my phone, almost without thinking. Then I opened the call history, and there it was. 2:17 a.m., 38 seconds. My stomach tightened immediately. I stared at the screen. The memory returned with perfect clarity. The breathing, the crying, the whisper. A thought entered my mind, one so absurd that I immediately rejected it, yet it refused to leave. What if she had called not accidentally, not because of a glitch? What if she had somehow called me? I shook my head. Grief makes people think irrational things. I knew that. Yet another question followed. A worse one. What if she needed me? What if that was the moment everything began? What if she was scared? What if she was alone? What if I stopped? Because I already knew there were no answers. Only guilt, an endless supply of it. Outside my bedroom window, the wind moved through the trees. The house felt strangely quiet. For a moment, I almost imagined I could hear her footsteps downstairs. Almost imagined she would call my name. Almost imagined everything was still normal. Instead, there was only silence. And in that silence, for the first time, I realized something terrifying. The worst part wasn't losing my mother. The worst part was knowing there would never be another chance. No future visit. No future conversation. No future phone call. Nothing. Only memories. And one impossible call at 2:17 inches the morning that I still couldn't explain. A call that was beginning to feel less like a mystery, and more like a goodbye. The years that followed passed the way years always do. Quietly, relentlessly, without asking permission. At first I measured time by grief. 1 week without her, 1 month, 6 months, a year, then eventually I stopped counting. Life has a cruel way of continuing, even when part of you remains frozen in the past. I finished university, found a job, moved to a different city, made new friends, built a career. From the outside, everything looked normal, successful even, but there was one thing I never left behind. The call, 2:17 a.m., 38 seconds. Whenever I changed phones, I transferred all my data, photos, contacts, messages, and somehow that call always came with it, buried among thousands of ordinary entries, waiting. Every now and then, usually late at night, I would open my call history and stare at it. I don't know why. Perhaps because it felt like the last remaining thread connecting me to her. Or perhaps because I still hoped that one day I would finally understand what had happened. But understanding never came. Only questions. The strangest thing about grief is that it changes shape over time. In the beginning, it feels like drowning. Then it becomes a wound. Years later, it becomes a shadow. Always present, always following, never completely gone. 5 years passed, then 6. By then I was 28. I had met someone, a wonderful woman named Claire. She was kind, patient, and somehow capable of seeing through the walls I spent years building around myself. Eventually we married. A few years later, our daughter was born. The first time I held her, I cried. Not because I was overwhelmed by fatherhood. Not entirely. I cried because suddenly I understood something I never understood when I was young. I understood my mother. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to love someone more than yourself. To worry constantly, to check your phone, to stay awake wondering if they're safe. To call simply because hearing their voice makes your day better. And with that understanding came a fresh wave of regret, because I finally saw my younger self clearly. The ignored calls, the rushed conversations, the excuses, the assumption that there would always be more time. One evening, after putting my daughter to bed, I found myself sitting alone in the living room. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The sound immediately transported me back to that apartment above the bakery. Back to that night. Back to 2:17 a.m. Without really thinking, I reached for my phone, opened the call history, and there it was. Still, exactly where it had always been. 2:17 a.m. 38 seconds. I stared at it. Then, something unusual caught my attention. A small icon beside the entry. One I had never noticed before. I frowned. Technology had changed over the years. Different updates, different backups, different operating systems. Perhaps it had always been there. Perhaps it hadn't. Curious, I tapped it. A menu appeared. Call details. Call export. Audio data. I froze. Audio data. My heart began beating faster. Surely not. Phone calls weren't normally recorded. At least not back then. Yet somehow there was a file attached. Tiny. Barely a few kilobytes. My finger hovered above the screen. Every rational part of me expected silence. Corrupted data. An error. Nothing. Instead I pressed play. At first there was static. Soft crackling. Then breathing. My entire body went cold. It was the same breathing I remembered. Even after all those years, I recognized it instantly. Uneven. Tired. Fragile. My hands began trembling. The sound continued for several seconds. Then came the quiet sob. Exactly as I remembered. A tear rolled down my cheek before I even realized I was crying. The recording wasn't long. Only 38 seconds. Yet listening to it felt like stepping backward through time. Back into the darkness of that apartment. Back into the worst night of my life. I leaned closer. The audio was poor, filled with interference. But underneath the static there was something else. A voice. Extremely faint. So faint I almost missed it. I increased the volume, then increased it again. Still barely audible. I closed my eyes and listened carefully. The voice came once, then disappeared. I replayed the recording. Again and again. Each time hearing a little more. Until finally, after what felt like an eternity, I understood. The voice wasn't saying many words. In fact, it was only a single sentence. A whisper, broken and distant, yet unmistakably hers. My mother's voice, and what she said shattered me. Don't blame yourself, sweetheart. The room disappeared. Everything disappeared. I sat motionless as tears streamed down my face. For years, I had carried guilt like a stone inside my chest. A weight that never left. A punishment I believed I deserved. But hearing those words felt like someone opening a locked door. Part of me wanted to reject it, to explain it away. Maybe I was hearing what I wanted to hear. Maybe grief was filling in the gaps. Maybe. Yet deep down I knew. Because no one else called me sweetheart quite the way she did. No one. I replayed the recording one final time. This time I listened beyond the words, beyond the static, beyond the mystery, and suddenly something became clear. For years, I had focused on the wrong question. I kept asking, was it really her? How did the call happen? What caused it? But those questions no longer seemed important, because whether the call was supernatural, technological, psychological, or something else entirely, the result was the same. The call had changed me. It had kept me connected to her. It had forced me to confront my regrets. And ultimately it had brought me here, to this moment, a father sitting alone in the dark, finally understanding the love his mother carried for him every single day of her life. A few minutes later, I heard small footsteps approaching. My daughter appeared in the hallway, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy," I quickly wiped my face. "Hey, sweetheart." She climbed into my lap. "Why are you crying?" Children ask difficult questions with remarkable simplicity. I smiled softly. I was thinking about Grandma. The grandma in the pictures. Yes. She wrapped her tiny arms around my neck. The gesture was so natural. So innocent. And suddenly I remembered doing the exact same thing decades earlier. Holding on to my mother after a nightmare. Believing she could protect me from anything. Maybe she still could. My daughter yawned. Then asked, "Do you miss her?" I looked toward the rain-covered window, toward the darkness beyond, and I smiled. Every day, she rested her head against my chest. Within minutes, she fell asleep. I sat there holding her, listening to the storm outside, feeling something I hadn't felt in many years. Peace. Not complete peace. I don't think grief ever disappears entirely, but enough. Enough to breathe. enough to move forward, enough to finally forgive myself. Later that night, before going to bed, I opened my contacts, scrolled down, and looked at her name, Mum. For nearly a decade, I couldn't bring myself to delete it. I thought removing it meant losing her. Now, I understood differently. The people we love do not survive inside phones, or photographs, or call logs. They survive inside us, in our habits, in our choices, in the love we pass forward. I closed the contact list, turned off the screen, and for the first time since that night at 2:17 a.m., I stopped searching for answers. Because some mysteries are never meant to be solved. Some are simply meant to remind us of what matters. And if there is one thing I've learned from all of this, it is something painfully simple. When someone you love calls, answer. Because one day, without warning, a conversation will become a memory will become a voice, and a voice will become something you would give anything in the world to hear just one more time.